Hey guys. Well, I don't know how your morning started. Mine began with my son, he's 7, coming to me as I was trying to get ready, and he said, I peed in a new place. And I was like, okay. And I discovered that the cup that sits on the edge of the bathtub that I used to rinse his hair, that's where he decided he was gonna pee this morning. So if you haven't had to carefully take a plastic stemless wine glass of pee and dump it in the toilet, you're doing better than I am. I told Kristen earlier that Proverbs used to be my favorite book of the Bible. And part of the reason for that is because I was homeschooled, which means I was very sheltered. I had a small world. I was homeschooled all the way, kindergarten, 12th, and I knew that I was pretty clueless, and I would worry about it. I would be like, what am I gonna do when I get a job and people are being mean or someone lies? I don't know what I'm gonna do. And Proverbs, I felt like, was this series of almost like life hacks. Like someone had sent a note in a bottle and had gotten to my desert island, and I read it, and it would equip me to go out into the mysterious and scary world one day and to know how to handle myself. So I love Proverbs, and I read it a lot. In my mind, it was teaching me skills that I would need for the future. Last week, I had the chance to teach one of my children a skill that they would need for the future, something that they'd never needed before. For the first time ever, my son, I don't know why there's 2 stories about him today, he wanted to call one of his friends on the phone. And on top of that, they had a house phone. So first I had to explain what a house phone was. He's like, you don't watch videos. And I was like, no. He was like, you don't play games? I was like, it's just numbers, buddy. And I said, so here's what's gonna happen. It kind of stays in one place in someone's house often, and we don't know who's gonna answer it. It could be anyone. So what you will say when they answer is, can I talk to Ryan? And he's like, all right. What if I say, who's this? And I was like, no, that's weird. Like, you're calling them. Just say, can I talk to Ryan? And he says, well, can I say, are you Ryan's mom? I'm like, no, bud, come on. Say it with me. Can I talk to Ryan? And so finally, it seemed like I'd gotten through to him, and he was gonna follow my advice. So I take my phone, and I put it on speaker so I can kind of coach him. And it rings, and someone says, hello. And I look over, and he's got this deer in the headlights look, and suddenly he goes, I'm Ryan. And I was like, oh boy. Thankfully, it was Ryan who answered the phone, and he was like, wait, what? But it went, it got better from there. Trying to explain the details of something to a person who doesn't have any context for the bigger picture is tricky. Without understanding the big picture, all you can do is follow directions or memorize a series of actions or words, like I thought I would do when I read Proverbs when I was younger. And for a long time, that's why I appreciated Proverbs. I could read something, memorize it, but the big picture never emerged for me. I was looking at it on a micro scale, and it didn't even occur to me that there might be a macro scale. It was like a bucket of apples, where I could just take one thing out and look at it, each proverb, and study it, and it would be good. But what I now think is that it's more like a bucket of paint. You can't take one paint out of a bucket of paint, but you can use it to color your surroundings. You can't hold it in your hand, but you can surround yourself with it and change the things that are around you with it. And while there's value to reading Proverbs in a way where you get kind of bite-sized wisdom or adages, there's so much more. And we can get a fuller picture of wisdom, of how the world works, and of our place in it when we see the way that Proverbs fits into the the big picture of the Bible. And this wouldn't be as hard for someone who kind of grew up in the times of Jesus as I think it is for us. No Twitter, no TV, no books. These stories in the Bible would have been internalized in the way that we obsess over certain TV shows or movies. I mean, like Ruth and Boaz were the Claire and Jamie of the culture that had these stories. There you go. The same way that we pore over our favorites, that culture would have known the stories of the Bible. So things would have clicked for them much easier. Did any of you guys ever have one of those viewfinder toys? This was like a long, long time ago in the 80s. Well, I had one, and I actually liked it. It was before my brain was rotted from TikTok. And, it's the red thing, like a pair of binoculars, and it's got the orange handle on the side that you pull, and this white cardboard reel that you put in, and you can look through and see a scene. Ours was a diorama of dinosaurs fighting. And you click the lever, and it rotates it, so you see the next picture. But sometimes, when you pull the lever, the little piece of paper, it doesn't turn all the way. It gets stuck. So then what you have to do is you have to pull it down, take the piece of paper out, readjust it, stick it back in, and then you're ready to go again. It will move clearly from one picture to the next. So we're going to adjust our lens a little bit so that we can understand this first section of Proverbs. And we're going to do that by pulling back and looking at the bigger picture, the story that Proverbs fits into. And that's a story of a man and a woman in a garden who wanted a shortcut to wisdom. Inside that story, we've got Solomon, a man who understood that wisdom was never something you could take, but it was something you could ask for. And if we know where to look, we can see that Solomon is weaving this story of Eden, the story of the two choices that Adam and Eve faced. He's weaving it all throughout the first chapters of Proverbs. What he does there is he introduces to his sons two completely different ways of navigating life and two characters that represent those two approaches, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. And they each make 3 speeches. They get 3 chances to state their case in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, making the case to Solomon's sons and to us. This is why you should follow me. I'm Lady Wisdom. This is why it would be better to follow me, Lady Folly. And there's a specific moment in Solomon's life that informs a lot of what is happening in those first chapters. In 1 Kings 3 that's where Solomon has his dream, and God comes to him and says, "What would you like?" And Solomon asks for wisdom. And as Solomon's dreaming, he uses this phrase that's really unique in the Bible. We only see it 4 times in the whole book. Once is here from Solomon. The very first time it's used, though, is to describe one of the trees in the Garden of Eden. And if you have the more common Bible translations, that phrase will appear in Genesis 2:17, describing the forbidden tree as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I've always, when you get older and start to look at some of the ideas that I carried about Bible stories that I didn't realize that I believed until I was forced to kind of study it as an adult, and then you're like, well, it actually doesn't make sense. I'd always been under the impression that the knowledge of good and evil was evil. To want that knowledge was insidious. But here's what I learned as I was reading about Solomon and this lesson he wants to pass on to his children. We're going to talk about the Hebrew words in this phrase, knowledge of good and evil. And at this point, I'm tempted to say something like,
I just love this kind of thing because I'm going to admit it, I'm a theology nerd, but that is one of my biggest pet peeves in life when someone says that. They're like, I'm so crazy, I just love the Bible, I'm so crazy. It feels like when you go to somebody's house and it's totally clean and they're like, I'm sorry, it's so messy, even though it's way cleaner than your house. Same vibe going on, sorry. Back to the good stuff here. So this phrase in Genesis, this phrase is most often translated into English as knowledge of good and evil, but in Hebrew, it's the knowledge of Tov and Ra. Remember, it's used in 3 other places. All of those places, Tov and Ra, it expresses the same nuance, which is a little bit different than what it expresses in Genesis. First off, the word Ra by itself is used in many places. It just means bad. In Jeremiah, the word is used to describe a basket of figs. And unless Jeremiah is like the ancient inspiration for VeggieTales, he wasn't talking about evil figs. Bad is the word that he was going for. The English word evil has so much like moral meaning that the word bad doesn't have. And in some instances, like the passage where Solomon uses this phrase, it's translated the knowledge of right and wrong, or the knowledge of good and bad. The Tyndale Bible, that's considered the first Bible, the first English Bible that was translated directly from the Hebrew and Greek. And in the Tyndale Bible, there is no tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There is a tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Again, outside of Genesis, these 3 other places that it's used, they're always talking about referring to like a child or someone who doesn't understand how to navigate the world yet. Simple is probably the word that Proverbs would use to describe someone like this. There was a quote from biblical scholar Tim Mackey, and he says, Adam and Eve are portrayed as children. The tree of knowing Tov and Ra represents 2 options or modes for how to know and experience God. Will they take this knowledge for themselves, or will they allow God to teach them? In 1 Kings, when God comes to Solomon in his dream, Solomon, author of what we're reading right now, wisest man who ever lived, here trying to communicate this central importance of wisdom to everything good in life. And God asks him, what do you want? Solomon's response, 1 Kings 3:7-9 is, Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Yet I'm but a little child. I don't know how to come in or go out. So give your servant a heart that listens, to judge your people, to discern between right and wrong, between Tov and Ra. 2 trees in the garden that represent 2 paths. The path that takes something so that you don't need to rely on God. Just sit around waiting until he decides that you're ready. And then there's the path that asks, doesn't take, doesn't try to bypass God. The early chapters of Proverbs tell us about these 2 different paths, 2 different ways of navigating the world, both calling out, both look good, Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. Now, if you're sitting down to write your children a letter, like Solomon is sitting to write to his sons, what would you say? Are you going to jot down some proverbs, leave a collection of good ideas that they can pick and choose from, like that basket of apples, all the lessons you've learned? Maybe your proverbs would be like, the fool leaves wet laundry in the washer, but the wise will dry it quickly and secure for themselves good-smelling garments. Or, it is better for a man to step on a rotting nail than to ask the wife of his youth, are you mad about something? Good to know for sure, but I don't think that that's what you or I would write. How would you tell them? There is no formula. There's a way that leads to death and a way that leads to life. How would you tell them that they're going to meet so many challenges and complications, and the only way to make it is to fear the Lord? Every day they'll face that choice. Will I decide what wisdom is, Will I decide when I'm ready for the complex things that life will bring me? Or will I wait on the Lord and in all my ways acknowledge him? Solomon writes to them about Lady Wisdom and says, she is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. And when he warns them of what will happen to those who follow the path of the woman folly, Proverbs 1:30-31 says, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would have none of my counsel, despise my every rebuke. Therefore they will eat of the fruit of their own way and be filled full with their own fancies. When we hearken back to the tree of life, to the knowledge of Tov and Ra, the decision that we all face between these two, Proverbs shows us this sort of drama of the Garden of Eden is enacted in our own lives every day. Proverbs 1:20 says, out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. The choice that we're used to thinking of as just something that Adam and Eve screwed up is a choice that faces everyone. And wisdom is not picky. She's not looking for kings. She is out in the street calling to anyone who will listen. That is me and you. And is there a better way to impress upon these children the significance of the way that they're going to choose to move through life? Is there any better way to show them how much it matters than to be weaving echoes of this Eden story all throughout? And because Solomon ain't no fool, he made the story about two beautiful and alluring women. Wisdom is more than the ability to make a good decision. It's a universal system, a grid that runs throughout reality. It's not one single adage, but the power by which God created everything. The texture and the grain of the universe and human experience is wisdom. It's the cause and effect that supports everything we do. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed that idea like this: the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Wisdom is like a compass whose true north is the tree of life and the one who is life. And God's not looking for men or women who will make smart decisions. Sometimes it's easier to boil it down to that. Actually, make good decisions. That's all God's asking me for, and then I'm going to be good to go. He's looking for people who aren't going to settle for a script, for people who will only be content walking with him. And in the most profound terms I can find, it is like when Danielson went to Mr. Miyagi and he said, teach me to fight. And Mr. Miyagi said, wax the car for me. Stain the fence for me, sand the ground for me, paint my house. And Danielson's about to just lose it, about to quit, until he realizes that it's not in the tasks, but in the motions that he was learning what he needed. When I go to a resale shop, which is one of my favorite things to do, all by myself, no children, no husband, don't ruin it. I don't go through the racks and racks of clothing like this, one at a time, where it's like, oh, that's not my color, that's not a season, that's not a style. That would take forever. What I do is I'll run my hand along the fabric and I'll feel all the shirts or all the pants or whatever. And it'll be like cheap silk. That quickly, I can recognize the feel of a quality piece of clothing, the weight, the texture of the fabric. I know it. I know what it feels like. As we move through life with God, we begin to recognize the wisdom that's threaded through the world, whose words and ways are just the weave of human experience. And in these opening chapters, when we encounter Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, we understand that the drama of Eden is being enacted every day by you and I, by us. That this is our story too. And who knows better than Solomon, who chose wisely for so many years and then began to live life by what seemed right in his own eyes? Who knows better the challenge of choosing wisdom over and over and over? So as you continue in this coming week, you're coming up on chapter 10 in Proverbs, which is the legit Proverbs-y part of Proverbs. That's the way the experts say it. As you're reading them, these are the tasks. My prayer is that you will be patient enough to learn the motions of wisdom that operate behind all of those. And I want to lead us through a time of prayer real quick to help you guys prepare for, I know you're going to talk in your groups and then go out and dive in to the book of Proverbs all week. I'm going to lead us through a prayer time where we invite God into this process, and I'm going to give you the chance to hear from him today. Maybe you had a morning where you're dumping pee out of the cup, or maybe you're in a season that is dark and heavy. Whatever it is that you brought in here, the Holy Spirit will lead us into all wisdom. And so we're going to talk to him for a few minutes. He's the best teacher. And God's not silent. God always wants to be heard. He's always speaking, and he always wants to be heard. So I'm going to lead you through some reflective prayers. If you would, I don't know, however you want to pray, and close your eyes, get comfortable. And the first thing that I want each of you to do silently is just to invite God to be here and to sit with you. And I want you to ask him a question. Ask him if there are any lies that you're believing right now. And then ask him, where did I first learn this lie? And now ask God, what is the truth that you want to replace that lie with? And now I want you to ask God, not just think for yourself, but ask him, if you're up for it, do I have someone that I need to forgive? It may be somebody else. It may be yourself. It may be God. So take a moment to identify that person. And if you're up for it, only if you're up for it, you can just kind of silently repeat this. I choose to forgive, and say their name here or your name. I choose to let them go. Now I want you to ask God, do I really know how much you love me? Listen to what you hear or feel. ask him, is there anything that I'm carrying right now that you want to carry for me? And ask him if he would give you something better in exchange for that load. Well done, guys, for going there, for praying through those things. Some of them can be challenging, tough. And thank you, Holy Spirit, for meeting us here, for welcoming us all, for your love and trustworthiness. Amen.